What up, though? SPLC. Thomas Russo. Thomas Russo. Patriot Front. This is on the picture here. This is Thomas Russo. Patriot Front. It says location Dallas, Texas. This is spycenter.org. Spycenter.org. Thomas Russo, his ascension into leadership, first with Vanguard America and later with his founding of Patriot Front. Thomas Ryan Russo grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. In his own words, a nation within a nation is our goal. Our people face complete annihilation as our culture and heritage are attacked from all sides. Patriot Front Manifesto. This is Thomas Russo saying our people face complete annihilation as our culture and heritage are attacked from all sides. He goes on to say, an African may have lived, worked, and even been classed as a citizen in America for centuries, yet he is not American. And this is peculiar because Thomas Russo, if we go back up and look at the picture of Thomas Ryan Russo, if you look at his picture, we can tell that he is obviously not an American. He is, in fact, a foreigner of Caucasian, European, Anglo-Saxon, Afro-Eurasian descent. He says, an African may have lived, worked, and even been classed as a citizen in America for centuries, yet he is not American. Now, when he says an African, who is he speaking of? Is he speaking for, or is he speaking of himself or people like him from the landmass that we term as Afro-Eurasia, which encompasses what we term as Africa, Europe, and Asia, all one landmass? Just a question. He says this, he is, as he likely prefers to be labeled, an African in America. Who does he speak of? Who does Russo speak of? The American identity was something uniquely forged in the struggle that our ancestors waged to survive in this new continent. Now, this is very new. This talking point is very new. He says the American identity, which is identity theft, because he calls himself an American and he is clearly not an indigenous American or an American Indian. He says was something uniquely forged in the struggle that our ancestors waged to survive in this new continent. The new continent is in fact America. And it's only new to the newcomer. It's only new to the foreigner, right? And he says the American identity was something uniquely forged in the struggle that our ancestors waged to survive. Now, everything that you've read, all the propaganda, and everything's propaganda, but all the propaganda that says that or that gives a lot of people the impression that when you say the word American, the first thing that pops in people's minds is the Anglo-Saxon. But here, the Anglo-Saxon is telling you of their struggles, of his ancestors' struggles waged to survive in this new continent, in the soil portion called America that was new to his ancestors. You thought, or some of you may have thought, that all the Anglo-Saxons that came here, all the Anglo-Saxons, Caucasians, Romans, Chinos, were all the king and queen's men and women. Rousseau is saying different. He's saying that his ancestors struggled. So if his ancestors struggled to survive here, how would they go and steal, or how would they go and steal tens of millions of able-bodied men and women from somewhere if they in fact struggled to survive? If you're struggling to survive, stop struggling. If you struggle to survive somewhere, the last thing on your mind is going to struggle to get someone else to come here against their will. America is truly unique in this pan-European identity, which forms the roots of our nationhood. To be an American is to realize this identity and take up the national struggle upon one's shoulders. Listen, Americans are members of the European racial collective. See this? This is identity theft at its finest. Or should I say at its most despicable? America is a people and a nation as an organic entity, and the United States has engaged in a practice of giving citizenship to all manners of other nationalities and all manners of alien races. So he mentions America and he mentions United States, which are two separate things. America is the soil, the very soil you stand on, or that I'm standing on. The United States are the ones that brought him here, or his ancestors here, in waves. So the very people that he has an issue with, the various all manners of other nationalities and all manners of alien races, he is in fact a part of those alien races. So it is very clear that the boundary that the government has of what is and what isn't an American is very different from the true definition and the true realization that it is as it says in our manifesto, that membership in the nation is inherited through blood. It's not given through ink. Thomas Rousseau on Nordic Frontier Podcast, January 8th, 2021. Again, Thomas Rousseau says, listen closely. It is very clear that the boundary that the government has of what is and what isn't an American is very different from the true definition and the true realization that it is as it says in our manifesto, that membership in the nation is inherited through blood. Thomas Rousseau. Noah Webster, American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828. American, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans. Rousseau, being a European, his ancestors saw the Americans when they got here. And they saw all the things that Americans did, and they saw how the Americans were living. And they saw America, which made them want to come here. Because who wants to go to a place where there is nothing, where there is no hope? Well, now we understand that they came for the American dream. See, Thomas Rousseau, or his ancestors, and, Anglo-Saxons and Caucasians, Rousseau speaks of their dream. Let's go over his dream. Americans are members of the European racial collective. That is his dream. American, in the 1828 Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, American originally applied and still applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races. The copper-colored races. The coloreds, the Negroes, the blacks, the African Americans, the black Americans, the mulattoes, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races. Americans, these are the Americans. Were, are, and forever will be, regardless of your dreams. Found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America, but now applied to who? Rousseau. And this is a very important part. The name American must always exalt the pride of patriotism. No nigga never been a patriot. You never heard a nigga talking about no patriotism and being patriotic. Why? Why would you have to be patriotic on the soil that you sprouted up from? However, we do know that there are some patriots here. Who are they? Think about it. Here we go. Newspapers.com. The Weekly Mississippian, Jackson, Mississippi, Friday, December 13th, 1839. We just spoke of the Noah Webster American Dictionary of the English Language's definition of the word American in 1828. So now we're at newspapers.com, the Weekly Mississippian, Jackson, Mississippi, Friday, December 13th, Friday the 13th, 1839. Negroes in jail was committed to the jail of Holmes County on the 21st of October, 1839 by Jacob Perkins, an acting justice of the peace in and for said county. A Negro boy by the name of Burwell, about 16 years of age, copper color, and says he belongs to Reuben Newman of Carroll County, Mississippi. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with according to law. November 10th, 1839, John C. Reeves, jailer. Printer's fee, $5. Yeah, they looking for an acting justice of the peace in and for said county. They looking for a Negro boy by the name of Burwell, about 16 years of age, copper color. Newspapers.com, the Weekly Mississippi in Jackson, Mississippi. Friday, December 13th, Friday the 13th, 1839, was committed to the jail of Jefferson County as a runaway by Sterling Cato. September 24th, 1839, a Negro man who calls his name George and says he belongs to John Johnson of Louisiana near St. Francisville. Said Negro is of a copper complexion, 5 feet 11 inches high, slim built, knock-kneed, a large sore on his left leg, and a small sore upon the top of his head. A small sear upon the top of his head, aged about 25 years. Said Negro had on a pair of brown linen pants, coarse cotton shirt, and a straw hat. Sound like what I wore the other day. The owner of the above described Negro is requested to comply with the law and pay costs before he will be released from custody. John H. Collier, jailer of Jefferson County, Fayette, October 12, 1839. John Johnson of Louisiana. So we got a Negro man who calls his name George and says he belongs to John Johnson of Louisiana. They always just give you the first name. That's very important. They always give you just the first name of the Negro. Why? Because if they gave you the last name, it's a possibility that he would belong to John Johnson and George's last name would possibly be Johnson. He would belong to his father. It's a possibility, right? They only give you the first name. Said Negro is of a copper complexion. Come on, man. This is from newspapers.com. Vicksburg Whig newspaper. Vicksburg, Mississippi. Thursday, December 22nd, 1836. 1836. $100 reward. Ran away from the plantation of the Subscriber, 8 miles south of Clinton, Mississippi. A yellow Negro man named Moses, aged about 30 years. He is a stout, well-built fellow, cunning and intelligent, speaks the Indian language, and went off in the costume of an Indian, wearing horsehair on his head. It is probable he will make for the Indian nation or for a free state. The above reward will be given for him delivered at my plantation, or half that sum if secured in any jail, so that I can get him. E.R. Anderson, Clinton, December 1st, 1836. Ran away from the plantation of the Subscriber, 8 miles south of Clinton, Mississippi. A yellow nigger named Moses, aged about 30 years. He is a stout, well-built fellow, cunning and intelligent. Speaks the Indian language. Why? Because he's an Indian. And went off in the costume of an Indian. Why? Because he's an Indian. Wearing horsehair on his head. Horsehair on his head. It is probable he will make for the Indian nation or for a free state. Why would he make for that Indian nation? He going home. Newspapers.com, the West Virginia Argus newspaper, Kingwood, West Virginia, Saturday, March 15th, 1880. No vag, no vag, no vague, no vag, no VAG. The contest the context of this article, I'm going to assume that vag means vagrant. If I'm wrong, please let me know. I'm open to learn. No vag, no vague, no vagrant. Vag, in this sense, probably means vagrant. In the Buffalo Police Court recently, there was a curious case involved in the examination of an Indian named Nicholas Smith from nearby Brantford, Canada, and a pretty-looking young white matron with 2 small children from the same vicinity. Her name was Miranda Potts, and she stated that her husband left her some 2 months ago. The Indian, who was remarkably intelligent and a good-looking chap, perhaps 35 years of age, with a Caucasian-formed head and face, and an excellent talker, accompanied by the woman, arrived at a hotel on Exchange Street, and the 2 registered as husband and wife. Thinking all was not right, the landlord notified the police. When they were arrested, on being asked what was his purpose in coming here with this married woman and her little children, the Indian promptly responded, to get married. Didn't you know that would be bigamy? A state's prison offense, His Honor demanded. Bigamy don't frighten Indian. The noble red man responded. Listen, the noble red man responded, but suppose you found yourself in the penitentiary. For as nice a woman as that, pointing to a pretty matron with that baby on her lap, as mildly unconcerned as if everything was perfectly serene, I would take my chances for a dozen penitentiaries. Why don't you marry a squaw? When I've got a chance to own as pretty a white wife as this, when I've got a chance to own, he asked them, the judge. The judge asked him, why don't you marry a squaw, an Indian woman? When I've got a chance to own as pretty a white wife as that, again pointing to the young matron with a cute smile of admiration in his black eyes. Indian know too much for that. He said, Indian know too much for that. Do you know what I've a good mind to do to you? Well, no. Send you to the workhouse as a vag or a vagrant. I guess not, said Mr. Indian with a still outer smile. I own a good farm out where I live with a good house on it, and I've plenty of money in my pocket. Where will your vag come in? Where will your vagrant come in? I suppose they mean vagrant. That's what I think they mean. This was a stumper. So Miranda Potts was called up to see what she had to say. So they called the white girl up to see what she had to say. You know, they say it's a white girl. They say it's an Anglo-Saxon woman. Could very well be a very light-skinned sister. Just never know. When asked if she did not know what a serious crime it was to marry a second time while her husband was living, she looked as innocent as a country girl sent out to milk the cows and said, "Let me, squire, I didn't know as it mattered. John, he's up and left me, and he never was much account anyhow." Then you could stoop. Then the judge asked him. She say, "Let me, squire, I didn't know as it mattered. John, he's up and left me, and he never was much account anyhow." And the judge said, "Then you could stoop to marry a nigger Indian?" The judge said, then you could stoop to marry a nigger Indian? She said, I don't know nothing about nigger Indian, but he's got a good place already provided. And so far as I've seen, he's a good man. And I'd a heap rather have a smart Indian that would give me a good place to live than a poor shankle, no account white man that runs away. But didn't you know if you married him, it would be a state's prison offense? She says, yes, I suppose it might be, but I thought I could just as well get a divorce after, when I'd have more time. As no crime had been committed, they were discharged. Newspapers.com, Hartford Current newspaper, Hartford, Connecticut, Thursday, October 15th, 1885. 1885, pay attention to the dates. We're all in the same time frame here. Smell me? Let's shake it. The Indian problem. The intelligent friends of Indian civilization accept the platform put forth by the recent conference at Lake Mobank as, to quote the Boston Advertiser, the clearest presentation yet made of the Indian problem as it is, and of the means by which it may be solved honorably, humanely, and for all time. The men who devoted a week's time to the cause were not unpractical theorists. The lending minds were those of men who had studied the subject at short range for years, who know the great difficulties in the way, and to whose labors is due very largely the encouraging progress which has been made during the past 15 years or since General Grant as president inaugurated what may be called the policy of civilization. Every shade of opinion was represented, accepting the thoughtless or brutal claims or brutal class, the thoughtless or brutal class. So they say every shade of opinion was represented, accepting the thoughtless or brutal class, who look upon extermination as the proper solution of the Indian question and regard the red man as having, like the old time slave, or worse, no rights which a white cowboy or land grabber need respect. The diversity of sentiment was shown in the animated discussion which followed the first draft of a platform as reported by the Business Committee, when the suggestion of absorption, citizenship, and the compulsory modification of bad treaties brought out the conflicting views in a forcible manner. After a profitable debate, earnest but without undue heat, the subject was recommitted, and the committee was enlarged by adding the ablest representatives of the differing opinions. As finally reported and adopted, the platform or statement met the unanimous approval of the Committee of Nine, as it did also of the entire conference. It would be difficult to select a more intelligent or an abler committee than the one referred to. Its members were Dr. Rhodes, president of Bryn Mawr College, a member of the Board of Indian Commission, and perhaps the clearest headed and best informed man in the country on the Indian question. Philip Garrett of Philadelphia, ex-Justice Strong of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Erastus Brooks, the Reverend Dr. Lyman Abbott, and William H. Ward, Professor C.C. Painter of Washington, Mrs. Quinton, Secretary of the Woman's National Indian Association, and Miss Fletcher, the ethnologist, whose work among the Omahas and for them is one of the few bright chapters of our dealings with the Indians. The platform regards education as the cornerstone of civilization, and to this and favors compulsory education where necessary. That is to say, where the savage is unwilling to have his children educated, the government shall step in and compel such education, as it is virtually done at present for the children of ignorant or depraved whites in half the states of the Union. It is remarkable to find a leading New York paper opposing such compulsory education and urging that the Indian shall be treated precisely as the foreign immigrant is treated in relation to citizenship. It shows an ignorance of the real condition of the Indian which is discouraging, and is only equaled by the assurance with which this most important question is considered and disposed of by a writer who evidently has never given it a moment's serious study. Education, especially industrial education, this allotment of land, the allotment of land, education, especially industrial education, the allotment of land in severalty, self-support, the abolition of the reservation plan, citizenship, and ultimate suffrage. These are the chief features of the platform. The philanthropic men and women who, under great discouragement, have for years been engaged in helping along this work are too well aware of the difficulties to be overcome to expect the speedy assimilation of the Indian into our civilization. But the cause is steadily gaining ground. The newspaper of today, in the hunt for sensations, makes the most of every Indian outrage and usually gives but one side of the story. There are at present less than 300,000 Indians in the United States. And mind you, what is the United States in 1885? This is important. This is something that you'll have to do on your own, including the 30,000 in Alaska. Of these, 140,000 wear the white man's dress, and 70,000, or about 1/4, speak the English language. Of what are called the wild Indians, there are very few that can be called hostile. When the 60 millions of Christian people of America wake up to the disgrace of the present situation and take as much interest in the little band of savage heathen at our doors as they take in the civilized heathen of Asia, the Indian problem will be solved very speedily. Meanwhile, the Mohonk Conference points out the most practical steps to be taken at once. When the 60 millions of Christian peoples, this is 1885, when the 60 millions of Christian people of America wake up to the disgrace of the present situation and take as much interest in the little band of savage heathen at our doors as they take in the civilized heathen of Asia, the Indian problem will be solved very speedily. Meanwhile, the Mohonk Conference points out the most practical steps to be taken at once. Newspapers.com, Ottawa Weekly Republic newspaper, Ottawa, Kansas, Thursday, March 13th, 1890. 1890. Remember. Y'all remember the Indian problem, Thursday, October 15th, 1885. The Indian problem, Thursday, October 15th, 1885. Y'all remember? Ottawa Weekly Republic newspaper, Thursday, March 13th, 1890. 1890. The Negro problem in the South is thus forcibly stated by the Reverend Plato Johnson, a colored teacher in Georgia. Now, my judgment is that when the South comes to the conclusion that there ain't no niggers in this country, that everybody is white before the law, the race question will take to the woods. Long there's one law for the whites and another for the blacks, we ain't gonna have no peace. But if you can sway the South to use the same hammer to break the head of a white rascal as it uses to break the head of a black scoundrel, then you's got this year problem by the horns. Newspapers.com, the Choctaw Advocate newspaper, Butler, Alabama, Wednesday, July 24th, 1912. Negro race has billion in U.S. Negro race has billion in U.S. Return of colored people to dark continent is impossible owing to the material progress made by them, it is announced. Kansas City, Missouri. Disenfranchise the Negro and send him back to Africa? Absurd. Impossible. More than $1 billion worth of United States real estate, which he owns in his own name in the United States, is not easily to be taken from him. Besides, the Negro is not an African. He is an American. African is a misnomer. Why try to send him to a country which is not his own? So says Dr. J.R. Hawkins of North Carolina, Secretary of the Commissioner of Education for African Methodist Episcopal Church, a delegate to the General Conference at the Allen Chapel. Dr. Hawkins has made a study of the business statutes of his race in connection with his regular work as one of their foremost educators. It probably will startle the world when it realizes we have acquired in the last 50 years over $1 billion in real estate, Dr. Hawkins said. And that is only the beginning of the rapid forward movement which the Negro or the American Indian is making as a businessman. The Negro could not help being a businessman. He was surrounded with it in the years of his slavery. He was taught how to drive a bargain in the horses or real estate, even if his master didn't teach him how to read and write. There are 400 self-supporting newspapers, daily and weekly, owned and published by Negroes or American Indians in the United States. 3,000 physicians have been graduated from Negro and white schools. 3,000 physicians have been graduated from Negro and white schools and are now practicing among their people. 2,000 lawyers have been admitted to the bar in the United States Courts of Justice, and 380 authors are found among our race. We own 41 schools and colleges, representing the investment of 38 million and 45 million has been spent in church property for Negroes. Negro men own and control 51 banks, which are prosperous and flourishing, and 650,000 has been invested in Negro libraries. Where are those libraries? Which libraries today were those libraries and now go by a different name? Could it be that your ancestors were thinking about you? We should find out. And it is significant that in the Southland, Negroes own 180,000 farms on which 50 years ago they toiled to the crack of the slave driver's whip. So they say, slave driver's whip. What does whip mean? What are all the definitions of the word whip? The Negro is a born American and he feels it is his country. He knows it is his country. For he is the American Indian. Africa has no call for him. It is as a fairy tale to him. Pestilence and disease are not uncommon in Africa, but America nurtures him and makes him strong, and he likes it and intends to stay in it because it is from the American soil that he sprouts from, like the dandelion. That doctrine is being taught our 1,650,000 children in the public schools. The Negro does not ask for any special legislation in his favor. He is willing to take his chance and is confident that he can bear his own burden as well as the white man. And toward that end, we are striving to educate our ignorant poor, make healthy the weak, and to help more Negroes to own their own homes and farms. Negro race has billion in U.S. Kansas City, Missouri. Disenfranchise the Negro and send him back to Africa? Absurd. Impossible. More than $1 billion worth of United States real estate, which he owns in his own name in the United States, is not easily to be taken from him. Besides, the Negro, besides the American Indian, is not an African. He is an American. African is a misnomer. Why try to send him to a country which is not his own or her own? This is from Black Consumers Have $2 trillion in buying power. BlackEnterprise.com, www.blackenterprise.com. Let's shake it. Diversity, Equality, Inclusion by Mitty Hicks. January 30th, 2025. Report. Black consumers have $2 trillion in buying power. Beyond their buying power, Black consumers are setting digital trends and leading engagement. Black audiences spend 32 hours on apps and websites on their smartphones and tablets. Black consumers have $2 trillion in buying power. Americans have $2 trillion in buying power. American Indians. Consumers have $2 trillion in buying power. 2025. Beyond their buying power, American consumers, they say Black consumers, are setting digital trends and leading engagement. According to Nielsen's report, American Indian audiences spend 32 hours on apps and websites on smartphones and tablets, 2 hours more than the total U.S. population. So connecting with Black consumers is essential. So connecting with American Indian consumers is essential. This community wields $2 trillion in buying power. Connecting with Black consumers is essential, the same as it ever was. This community wields $2 trillion in buying power. Remember 1900s, the early 1900s? Go back, scroll up, rewind. Black culture drives current digital trends. Internet slang like period, bay, and cap are all examples of how brands adopted African Americans. Now, You go from black to African American, but we are going to properly put us in our proper place, which is American Indian and American. American culture drives current digital trends. Internet slang like period, bay, and cap are all bay and cap are all examples of how brands adopted African American vernacular. African American cap on social media. According to the report, memes, for example, draw from iconic black moments and influences, iconic American moments and influences. What has been frustrating for American consumers, American Indian consumers, who they improperly label as black consumers, is how companies fail to attribute these phrases and images to the origins of black culture, but they do attribute them to black culture. And it is false. Or to take a word from what they term as internet slang, like cap, which is not internet slang. People been saying cap since I was a shouty. Come on, man. Just because it's the first time that the Anglos and the Afro-Eurasians and everyone who's not from this soil, just because it's the first time you're hearing these words, don't mean that they knew, because they not. Calling some cap or somebody cap ain't new. Calling some lit or saying somebody lit ain't new. Black consumers have become the general market on digital platforms. Black consumers have become the general market on digital platforms. Of course. Nothing happens without the niggas' cooperation or participation. Can anyone say Democratic Party? Black listeners outpace engagement with audio from podcast to radio. Black consumers have become the general market on digital platforms. Black consumers, American consumers, American Indian consumers have $2 trillion in buying power. I don't think anything has changed. Do you? Do the right thing.